Flywire is going to take a quick look at the stall spin loss of control accident of a J35 Bonanza. I think there's some real important lessons on this one, so stick with us on Flywire. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on Flywire we're going to look at the stall spin accident of J35 8255 Delta. This accident occurred north of Helena, Montana on June 24, 2013, just after noon local. So there's no ADSB or anything like that from back then. But we have the impact and we have some pictures. The aircraft departed Helena Regional Airport about 11:50 from runway 34, and the crash site is about 10 miles north of the airport. A family member reported in an interview that the pilot was going out to practice because he hadn't flown in a month, and he was planning on a family trip over the July 4th weekend. The local weather observed 10 miles south of the airport was calm winds, visibility 10 miles, temperature 68 degrees, dew point 44, and the altimeter is 2965. So sounds like a pretty nice day. Relatively low density altitude. The land there is about 4,000 feet, a little less than 4,000 feet. The aircraft impacted the ground in a left wing low, nose down attitude on a heading of 090 degrees. And the at-rest heading was also 090 degrees. The aircraft came to rest upright with the impact damage to the cockpit and wings consistent with a near vertical impact, and it sat down. Both fuel tanks were breached, as was the aux tanks. And what that tells us is the airplane wasn't rotating significantly enough in a flatter attitude. The cockpit controls for the mixture, propeller, and throttle were all observed to be in the full forward position, and the landing gear remained in the retracted position inside the wings. Post-crash inspection of the airframe and the engine revealed no problems were noted that would have prevented normal operation. The airplane had an annual inspection on 3/21/2013, so about 3 months prior, and then a dual yoke control had been installed at that time in the airplane. Some interesting comments from witnesses to the accident were recorded in the docket. The first witness lived about a mile from the crash site and reported that he first became aware of the airplane when he heard the engine suddenly change pitch and speed up. And he looked up and saw the airplane spinning slowly in a nose-down attitude. He observed 5 spins before he lost sight. What slowly, I'm not sure. The second witness, who lived about 0.8 of a mile from the crash site, observed the airplane and heard the props of a small plane struggling twice. This is a quote. He thought he heard a bang on impact, but he was not certain if there was another airplane in the area prior to the accident. That's kind of an unusual thing to say, but it's important because a third witness, who contacted the NTSB himself, reported that he lived 2 miles west of the airport and he was about 8 miles south of the crash site. He thought it to be the same shape and size as a Cessna 172, and as he watched it, another airplane larger than the first appeared. He thought it was closing on the high-wing airplane, eventually making an evasive maneuver to avoid a collision. And he's overtaken and made a really serious maneuver to avoid a collision and then pressed on. The ATC controller at the airport reported that he watched the accident airplane depart to the north and did not observe any other airplane in the vicinity. He did say there was a Cessna 182 doing touch and goes on runway 27, so slightly offset from the runway 34 where the accident airplane took off from. Notably, the airport does not have radar. Among the NTSB docket files are copies of the pilot logbook, and in reviewing that and comparing it with the report, I noticed several discrepancies. I'm not going to quibble about tenths of hours, but the report lists 69 hours in make and model, and the logbook shows 19.4 over a period of 2 years and 3 months. The only apparent checkout program for the pilot was a 1.0 flight with 5 landings. I'll stipulate the possibility here that the logbook in the docket is incomplete. And if so, I think that's serious because the record is what's in the docket, not what somebody left out. There's discrepancy on the part of investigators, I think. If this is an incomplete log. What else is incomplete? Additionally, in the logs available, there is no corresponding flight entry to the flight review or the make and model sign-off date. This may seem like a minor point, but as I said, the NTSB docket is an official record, and then it is stipulated in courts of law as a complete and factual repository of the accident investigation. In a lawsuit, these facts could be germane to the case. At this point, we can't tell whether the fault lies with the NTSB or the prevarication on part of the pilot. And this is important for us to actually piece what happened, and everything be reliable. Okay, so it's plain to see here that the aircraft departed control flight and entered into a spin. The power was set to full, and wonders how these two facts could be true at the same time. To spin an airplane must first stall and then yaw to depart control flight. With full power, the only logical way for that to happen would be in a power-on stall. I can't think of any other situation. I've always thought that power-on stalls were just a thing because we can do them. I never really thought it was about a realistic scenario. The pitch angle required at full power from takeoff is extremely high for any pilot not experienced in aerobatics. I don't know why you'd be doing an airplane that wasn't aerobatic. For the average pilot, it is unthinkable. It is in an extreme, unusual attitude. The only time you use full power is for takeoff, and the recovery is actually pretty easy. You just unload. That's what you do, and that's what you're taught. The FAA ACS pretty much restricts the power-on stall power setting to no less than 65%. From a realistic standpoint, the only time you'd most likely be able to stall with power on like this is at altitude. For a normally aspirated engine, the max power setting you'd likely see is about 75% power at a density altitude of about 8,000 or 9,000 feet, like this accident happened at. And I've always had a problem. So I personally have always had a problem with power on stalls. So it's looking to me like this J35 was practicing power on stalls. And like I said, the density altitude was probably around 8,000 to 9,000 feet, and the engine was putting out somewhere around 65 to 75% horsepower. The airplane was in a spin with the power all the way up. And given the accident profile, I think this pilot was led down the primrose path, so to speak. Okay, and here's why. The recovery from a power-on stall is to unload. If you stay coordinated, meaning you use the rudder, you will accelerate out of a stall condition fairly quickly. That becomes the standard. However, if you screw it up, what happens? Don't forget that the FAA position is that we stay away from spins. That's the best practice. We avoid them. We talk about them, but we avoid them. The power-on stall is the worst case scenario for the bad that can happen in this situation. Okay, so imagine, if you will, put yourself in the seat. You're at the stall brake with full power and the nose perhaps 20 to 30 degrees nose high. The airplane brakes to one wing and begins to spin. Your recovery plan is to unload, so you do that. And what happens? The spin accelerates. It doesn't stop. You don't recover from the stall. Your spin accelerates. Damn, that's unexpected. Yeah? Here's what's happening. First off, power is a pro-spin input, meaning that when you add power, the airplane tends to flatten out, torque and P-factor, and essentially it digs into the spin. Yaw rate increases. The odds of recovering a spin with power on is small. Add to that, if you push the stick forward, well, you just added another pro-spin input. The airplane tends to flatten out a little more and yaw faster still. Okay, you might have seen a flat spin at an air show. The routine is to add out aileron, full power, and forward stick. That's how you do a flat spin, and you increase your yaw rate. And a Bonanza, it's not going to be a flat spin. It's going to be still pretty significantly nose down. It's not an extra. You cannot recover the airplane from a flat spin. You have to reduce power, neutralize controls. But that's not what we teach in this situation. Power on stall, unload. Remember, we don't teach spin recovery, and I suspect that this pilot really had no idea what to do next. And he was so confused by this situation that pulling the power to idle just didn't occur to him. That's the stress of a few seconds, and I'm in a really unusual situation. What do I do? In the recovery from an unusual attitude world, more power is effective in a very small, narrow range of upsets. Very controlled, very coordinated. Let's look at the airplane now and see what I'm talking about. The thing we want to do when a spin happens is basically you have to stabilize the airplane. There's a real popular mnemonic out there, PARE, that's Power, Aileron, Rudder, Elevator, okay? I personally am not a big fan of mnemonics. I don't like cigar. I don't like, all the different mnemonics out there to remind you of what to do. I'm more of a flow kind of a person, and I like to do actions. That's what I think of in a flow, is I do actions. And for me, that extra step of remembering what the word is and then remembering what the letter stands for, there's actually 2 extra steps there. To me, that's just, I don't like it. You may be different, and that's fine. I don't care. But I don't like PARE because of this situation, all right? What you have to do first is you have to stabilize the airplane, okay? You have to neutralize, you have to take out the pro-spin inputs. I've done several accident investigations when I was in the IAC as an interested party, and in particular pits, spin accidents where the power remained up during the spin. And that is a pro-spin action, and people had trouble recovering from the spin. So when I didn't invent this stuff. I'm not saying that I'm, God's gift to aviation here, but in my pilot training in the Air Force, what I learned is that the boldface essentially is this, and I'm going to paraphrase it, idle, neutral, aft, okay? So you pull the power to idle, and you neutralize the ailerons because those are pro-spin. Even in a jet, you have pro-spin because there is torque and P factor from the spinning disc inside the engine. And I've experienced that when you get really, really slow, you get a little bit of torque. Okay, so it's kind of weird. But so idle, neutral, aft. Power to idle, ailerons to neutral, and you want to go full aft on the stick. The reason you go full aft on the stick like this is you want to stabilize the airplane in the spin, okay, to maximize your ability to use the rudder to stop the yaw, okay? Idle, neutral, aft. You're stabilizing the airplane. That's the first step in spin recovery. And you're doing this. So we think about this as the relative wind is basically going up this way, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm allowing as much relative wind to go across the rudder here as possible, and this is the effective part of the rudder that's going to stop my yaw. So if I did something like this, or if I had forward stick, that is minimal. Now there's about this much rudder that's exposed to the relative wind. It isn't going to work, and that's one of those reasons why, is forward stick should not be forward, okay, because it blanks the rudder out. So idle, neutral, aft is the first thing we do, and then we got to figure out what direction we're spinning. And frankly, you can be pretty easy about that. You can push on either one. And if you push on one rudder and there's no resistance, it's the wrong rudder. Push on the other rudder and it's the hard rudder, okay, to push. That's the correct rudder because you have a stalled condition here, and if you push it the other way, you've actually got airflow on that other side. And so that's, in a spin left, that's what's going to happen here. This will be the easy rudder. This would be the hard rudder. So it's also, if I'm in a left spin, the ground is going to the right. My perception is, I'm in a frame of reference here, so the ground is going to the right, and I step on where the ground is going. That's the hard rudder, and that's how I figure that out. So idle, neutral, aft, rudder opposite the spin. Okay, that's it. Now the next thing you have to do is, as the yaw starts, this is a fraction of a second. It's not, I'm waiting for 30 seconds, I'm going to get some coffee or something. When the yaw starts, slows down, you go forward on the stick because you want to break the stall on the wings. And I'm going to show you, we're going to go look at the Bonanza here real quick because I got some real interesting, tough video on the spin we're going to look at. But the spin left, this wing is stalled, that wing is not, okay? And maybe partially stalled, but I think after we see the tough video, we'll see probably, and I haven't tufted this wing in the Stearman, but that wing is going to be mostly flying, and that's the auto-rotational moment. So we go forward on the stick to break the stall. Now we neutralize the rudder okay, and we're faced with the dive. Now we have to recover from the dive. So that's the actions that we take. Idle, neutral, aft, rudder opposite the spin, stick forward just forward to neutral, okay, to break the AOA and get the airplane flying again, neutralize the rudder, and then recover from the dive. So reason why you only go forward, just forward to neutral, is the more forward you go, the more you're going to pitch over, negative, okay? And if you don't take the rudder out, when you do this, and I've been with students that do this, is they leave the rudder in and they pitch forward really, because they're really nervous, way far forward. The airplane pitches up inverted and starts spinning the opposite direction. That's what's going to happen. So that's not what we want to have happen. Idle, neutral, aft, okay, rudder opposite the spin, stick forward to break the AOA and get the airplane flying again, neutralize the rudder, recover from the dive. Now let's go look at some of the airflow on a more modern conventional design. All right, here's we'll talk about the steerman. So the airflow is a little bit different on this airplane. As you can see, when I go idle, neutral, aft, this is what happens here. Again, the relative wind is about like this in this direction across the rudder, okay? So I'm not exposing very much of the rudder to the relative wind in this situation. But the interesting thing is this rudder is really, really effective. So I'm not talking about the V-tail. I'm not sure exactly what the aerodynamics of the V-tail is. I'm not going to spin one to find out. So we're just talking about spins in any general aviation airplane. So idle, neutral, aft, you have the airflow going across. On the inside of the spin, say we're spinning left again, this is a very turbulent area, but the other side has got pretty good flow. So when what happens is when you release the pro-spin control, and that's how we get one into a spin to practice one, is we use, for a left spin, we use left rudder at the stall to generate a left spin, okay? When that happens, and we're spinning, and then when I neutralize the rudder, when I just let it go, then there's enough airflow on this other side that it generates lift, because this is another lifting body right here. It just happens to be vertical. When that happens, it generates enough lift that it zeroes out the auto-rotational moment. There's another thing happening, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. But that's what's happening. It's a little bit different than the rudder configuration in the steerman. We're going to take a look at the tufted video for the wing on this, and as we can see in the full stall, both wings are stalled. But then once the airplane has started auto rotation, then the inside wing, to use the FAA diagram, says more stalled, and the outside wing is less stalled. Well, I'll tell you, what I see in the tufted video is that, yes, the inside wing is stalled. I'd say fully stalled. The outside wing is almost fully flying. And what that does is that creates a auto-rotational moment this way. So it's it's in a couple of axes here. So you have this wing is not producing any lift at all, so it has a tendency to go down anyway. The outside wing is flying, and it wants to generate lift and roll, and that roll translates into yaw, like that. And that's why you get an auto-rotational moment, and it wants to keep doing that. There's more to say about the design of this wing and that VG that sticks out on the leading edge. And I did a short video several months ago about that. I'm going to do another one. It's not germane to this stall spin video right now. So what I want you to take away from this is that a power-on stall is as close to where you're going to get, I think, in a departure in a training situation. Is that what happened in this airplane? I don't know if this is what's happened in the J35, because we didn't have any witnesses say, oh yeah, he was doing stall practice. We just had somebody say that he pushed the power up. And then when he looked at the airplane, he saw the airplane. So there was some delay. He saw that it was spinning. Okay, so to spin an airplane with full power, you have to be doing something else. Okay, you got to stall it. And it's pretty hard to actually stall the airplane in accelerated stall. I've demoed that in this airplane. it's pretty hard to do that, and then drop into a spin. So what I want you to take away here is that in a power-on stall, you have to be very, very careful. It's the unload is the way to recover from a power-on stall, but if you get beyond the stall and you start to slice, the nose starts slicing. In other words, it's not straight. We stall, we push it over, we're good, but if the nose starts slicing left or right, that means that you have a departure happening and the airplane is going to be into a spin. Power is a pro-spin input, and you got to pull the engine to idle. You have to, absolutely, right now, no delay, pull that engine to idle, and then neutralize the controls and recover from the spin. Okay, that's what you have to do. You have to use a rotor to do that. And if you haven't had training, well, you got to be really, really careful getting into that power-on stall situation, because I think you're right there on the fine feathered edge of getting into an accelerated stall and spin in that situation. So my suggestion is you go out and do a little bit of UPRT so you can understand what's happening in this situation. So that's my nickel on the grass. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, especially about doing power-on stalls. And, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Flywire.